I was looking for a way to do the steps faster, so I developed this tool. Well, again, because I hate the thing that only does one thing.
Welcome to Make and Decorate, a podcast for makers who love to sew, quilt, and decorate. Hey guys, welcome to episode 36 of season 2. I am your host, Stephanie. Welcome to the show. So today, my voice is going to be really weird and funny. I am sick this week, so I'm doing my best to keep my voice steady and keep the coughing down to a minimum, which means a lot of editing. So anyway, I'm recording this on Tuesday, October 15th. However, the guest segment of this episode was recorded earlier, like last month, so my voice is perfectly fine in that part of the episode. So anyway, fall weather is definitely here for real. So it has settled in, and the cool air is always kind of hard to get used to in Chicago because it's never like a gradual decline. It's always like something so dramatic, like a 30-degree difference within, 48 hours. So that's kind of what it's done. And let's go back to the reason that I have this cold. On my last episode, I talked about going to the Bears game reluctantly. And this is why, because when it rains and you're sitting outside in the rain for hours, you get sick. But really, I dressed appropriately. I had my layers on and everything, so I didn't get sick right away. Who got sick right away? Yeah, my husband. Hello. Yeah, oh man. I'm telling you, never again. He thinks it's all worth it. He's just like, we won, had some beers and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's not worth it. So anyway, that is why I have this terrible cold. And it's something that's been going around this area anyway. Everybody's getting this sinus cold, and that's what I've got, with tons of coughing. So moving on, I haven't gotten a ton of stuff done project-wise from my quilting and sewing room. I did finish the baby panel that I have been working on for my nephew, my little baby nephew, who was born in August. And it is the Robert Kaufman Oh How They Grow baby growth panel. And it's got these really cute forest animals on it. So I finished the quilting, and I just finished the binding on it, and I'm really pleased how it turned out. I did almost all of it was free motion quilted. I just did the walking foot around and made boxes around the days and the months and the numbers, because freehand straight lines, I don't know, I tried to do the ruler, but it was just easier and faster to switch out to the walking foot. So that's how I did that. And I used Hobbs 80/20 cotton poly batting, and it was really, really nice to work with. I'm trying to pay more attention to the different battings that I use, and making notes about how it quilts, what the drape is on the quilting, and that sort of thing. But I definitely lean toward the natural fibers for myself, at least. But the 80/20, though, is much more light in weight, and I think it's nice for babies and kids because it's not so heavy on them. And it's still 80% cotton. So just that little bit of the poly fiber kind of lightens up the entire thing. So I got that finished, and I haven't really done too much else that in respects to that since the last podcast. And it's not that I don't have things to work on or that I don't feel like doing it. It's just that there's been no time. I've been like the last couple of weekends either away. I visited my sister in Wisconsin, and then this past weekend I had a pumpkin day at my house. So just a lot going on. And this past week and not feeling well doesn't help things. And when it rains, it pours. So in addition, right about the same time I started getting this cold, I injured my left leg. This is so silly. Okay, so this is goes in line with how our weather changed. So the one day last week, we had a beautiful 70-degree day at the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day, it dipped down into the 50s. And I was wearing flip-flops. Can I tell you that flip-flops are so dangerous? And I know they're dangerous, and I'm like so clumsy in them, and I've tripped a million times. So I was I was in a hurry. I had cleaned these rugs from my kitchen and had them dried outside. It started to rain. I'm panicking, and I'm running out there to get these rugs, and I'm running in these flip-flops. And it's only one step. So the one step I had to go up on my deck, my flip-flop caught the edge of the step, and then I started to fall. And you know the feeling when you know you're falling, but you're trying to do everything you can to not fall, to gain your balance? Well, there was a chair right there that I grabbed onto, and it was like all of a sudden I was in this slow motion matrix sort of dimension where I'm grabbing the chair arm and holding on. My body is contorting and twisting, and then I feel this pain like none other, and then I was like, I had to concede and go with the fall and continued to fall down. And then the time came real again, and everything was in fast motion, but it was just so bizarre. But man, so basically I strained my, what does my athletic trainer sister call it? Gluteus medius muscle or whatever, but it's the muscle on your upper left thigh that is connected to your hip bone. But basically I don't care what it is, it just hurt like crazy, and it affects how you walk, how you sit down and stand up. It's that muscle that lifts you and lowers you and lifts your body up the step and down the step. So I couldn't do any of that for the first couple days. It was crazy. Oh my gosh. And I'm still I'm much better, but it still hurts. Like I have to go up and down the stairs like a toddler, one step at a time, like going down the step with my, bad leg and leading up the step with my good leg. I mean, I can sort of go up and down them if I force myself, and then I'm like, ow, 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 every step. But it's getting better. It really is. But it's just so bizarre. And I mean, it was like, my husband's like, why do you wear the flip-flops? Well, I won't be wearing them anymore because like fall and winter is kind of coming in here for good. All right. So anyway, that's like my whole like thing that has happened in the past week. Just a series of unfortunate incidents. All right. So do you guys listen to the podcast, The Off Kilter Quilt? Frances O'Rourke Dowell does that podcast, and I had her on my show last year as a guest. She's been doing her podcast for 10 years, and she's a quilter and just she's an author and just does wonderful things. And she mentioned me in her last episode of the podcast, and she said very nice things about me and my podcast. And I was just overwhelmed with just feeling of gratitude and I mean, I think she listens to my show, so I just want to say publicly thank you so much, Frances. And it was because of her that I really forged ahead to going forward and making this podcast happen for me, because every time I had those feelings of doubt and, am I good enough? Who's going to listen to me? She had said, we need more people, quilters and, these more homegrown grassroots type of podcasts out there. And I said, okay, then I can do that. So yeah, I'm thank you so much, Frances. And I love your podcast. And I'm just grateful that we have people in our circle of quilters and makers and sewists and crafters that are really supportive of each other, and we celebrate each other's successes and endeavors and whatever we're out there doing. All right, so before we get into my conversation with Cheryl Sleboda, I just want to remind you guys to, if you listen on iTunes, to please rate and review the show if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate that, and it does help, make the show a little bit more visible to new listeners. And also, if you just share it with your friends or guilds or people that you think might enjoy the show, that really helps a ton. And thank you to new Patreon subscribers. I am so thrilled that I've got some subscribers now. This is great. The new bonus episode is coming out Friday, the day after this episode publishes. So be on the lookout for that. And and if you haven't checked it out yet, go to my Patreon page, Make and Decorate. It's at patreon.com, and I'll have the links in the show notes. Okay, you guys, get ready to learn all about some amazing quilting and sewing techniques that will change your quilt and sewing game. Why? Because I have Cheryl Sleboda on the show today, and Cheryl is a full-time quilter, fiber artist, everything cosplay, and a teacher, and the list goes on and on and on. So we are going to chat with her and find out all about this great stuff. So welcome, Cheryl. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Really good, really good.
Excellent. Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so happy that you're here. And just a little background for the listeners. I first saw you on TV on one of the PBS shows. It was Quilting Arts.
Yes.
And then not long after, this is my early days of quilting, because I was just a sewer before, of just clothing patterns and home dec and stuff. And then I started quilting, and then I was in the Chicago Modern Quilt Guild, and you were one of the guests. And you brought in these little tiny quilts. They were like the size of a tile.
Yes.
And they were so cool. And then I immediately recognized you. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's on TV, and now she's here. So
yeah, I get that a lot, actually, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, it's so cool. And then I learned that you are from my area, so that gets even better and better. And I've seen you on several occasions since then. But it's cool that you're from Chicagoland. Yay!
Yes, yeah, I know. Yeah, born and raised in Chicagoland, and I who knew we were so far apart and yet so close together.
I know, it's crazy. So yeah, great. So all right. So let's talk about where all of this came from, where this all began for you with sewing, your love for heirloom fabrics and technology, because those are the opposite ends of the spectrum, and you do both and you enjoy both, and I love that. I think that is so awesome. So tell us.
Well, I mean, like most people, I think most people around my age, and I'm, in my mid 40s, and I learned how to sew, right? Okay, so I learned how to sew in home ec. My parents didn't teach me. My mother didn't teach me. My grandmother didn't know how to sew, but my grandmother did buy me a sewing machine for my senior year, for Christmas. And so that sewing machine basically got me through college, and my desire to be a theater costumer.
Hmm.
So I went to school for theater, but decided that I was going to branch out and actually do the shows before I finished my degree. and and then quickly realized, wow, there's like not a lot of money for me in that field. So I quickly changed to the comic book industry, where I spent, oh, probably 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was in college, I was very active in our cosplay community. Um, I used to dress up and run around with all the other nerds. It was not called cosplay back then, cosplay meaning costume play.
Uh-huh.
It didn't have that name back then. You were just nerdier than the other nerds, and you dressed up as weird stuff, and you were just generally thought as kind of a weirdo. But when I worked with the full time comic book job, um, I really wanted to keep sewing as a hobby, and I took up quilting.
Mm.
So I think that there are going to be people who do that, who are cosplayers now, who will, think about their cosplaying and their sewing abilities now. But then as they get older and they have a family and they have a home to build and to decorate it and all those things, they're going to do the same thing I did. Um, and so now my comic book career is over, and I am doing the quilting and the cosplay business end of things full time. So it's been a really wild roller coaster journey. Um, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
So
uh,
yeah, that is so cool. And I never even knew. I've always known you more as a quilter. So it wasn't until more recently where you were really, now you've got your secondary business,
yes,
so much
yes.
cosplay.
So much cosplay,
Yeah, it's
yes.
so cool. And that's really where your roots started in sewing then, it sounds like, I
It
guess.
did, yes. And
Yeah.
again, I had that garment background. I had that the background in creating uh fantastical outfits, things that I didn't have patterns for, and really put all of that aside. Now occasionally I would make a garment for myself, but as you know, it's so much more expensive to make it than it is to go buy it.
Sure.
So for most of us, we don't make garments unless we really have to. I made my wedding dress. I made, certain things here and there, but really I did more quilting as a hobby. And I really didn't expect that quilting would be a career for me
Hmm.
until I did that project, which was the lecture that you saw when I came to the Chicago Modern Quilt Guild. I between 2007 and 2011, I did a mini quilt a week for 5 years straight.
Wow.
And those little mini quilts were really for me to get myself out of a quilting rut. And I had made all these giant bed quilts, wall quilts, quilts for the sofa, quilts for the, every family member. There was something, I was just done making large, giant quilts, and I was sort of burnt out.
Hmm.
And so I decided I was going to make these little mini quilts as sort of like um, a way to get the ideas out of my sketchbook and out of my head and into fabric. And I was also working full time. I was finding that I was only in my quilt studio like once a month or once every other month. And then I started to feel bad because I have all this stuff, but I wasn't using any of it.
Mm.
And I know that a lot of people can probably relate to that. Our lives are so busy,
Hmm.
and where's the me time? And I decided I was going to carve out like the weekend space as much as possible to do these little mini art quilts. And they were small, they were 6 inches square,
Hmm.
and they were supposed to be a finished quilt. So they are all bound and finished. And I had from Sunday to Monday to finish each week. And I started it as like almost like a New Year's resolution,
Hmm.
and just kept going for 5 years and didn't stop. And so really, that's where I feel like I got to stretch all my creativity out. Try. I was not afraid to try anything. If it was weird in the fabric and quilting industry, I wanted to try it. And I didn't have a huge investment in it because I was only doing something that was 6 inches square.
Mm-hmm.
So if I didn't like it, I could put it away and not feel bad about it. And so that's really, I think, where my career took off.
Mm-hmm.
Was in the middle of that. I was blogging each one. I started to gain this following. And then this fateful day of running into who my quilting hero, which is Pokey Bolton from Quilting Arts
Oh,
Magazine.
yes. Oh, man. She's
And
awesome. Mm-hmm.
she was like my idol. And
Mm.
I ran into her and she said, "Hey, I know your name. You comment on my blog a lot." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, Pokey Bolton knows who I am."
Isn't that crazy?
It's so weird. Well, and what's funny is now that happens to me, and I feel so honored and so blessed. It's an incredible thing. So, what goes around definitely comes around. Um, and so she said to me, "We really would love to have you in the magazine." And I thought, I don't have anything that I'm good at that's good enough for the magazine. And she was like, "How about those lights in quilts that you're doing? That's really interesting."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't really want to be known as the girl who lights up quilts. I wanted to be known as the girl that puts fabric manipulation into quilts.
Ah,
And you
yeah.
don't get a choice as to what you're, famous for.
Aha, yes.
So the market really decides.
Oh, interesting. That is very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah. But it opens the doors for you, the lights.
they did. And, I still to this day sell my light up quilt and garment sewing book. I sell the kits on my
Mm-hmm.
website. I sell a lot of them to Girl Scout troops
Oh, cool.
and like STEM and STEAM programs
Mm-hmm.
because it's a way to learn sewing and circuitry 101 at the same time.
Yeah.
So they're great little projects. And they did open the door for me really
Uh-huh.
by putting these lights into quilts. And really how I came to it was uh, someone from FIT, so the Fashion Institute of Technology,
Mm-hmm.
and MIT, they got together and developed this conductive thread.
Yes.
And that is what makes these soft sewable circuits go. And I found the source for the conductive thread and just started making stuff. And people really thought it was cool, but it is super niche. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
niche of a niche.
Sure it is. Yeah. Yes.
And I would teach it in places like, Houston, International Quilt Festival in Houston asked me to come and do some demos with it. And, it was like, it ranged from either, "I can't wait to try this, I really want to do this," or "That's too weird, I would never put that in my quilt."
Oh.
So I'm okay with either one, but I did think that was a little funny that, the reactions were so varied.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's
still to this
true.
day, I put lights in my quilts and
Oh,
I
good. I
enjoy
was going to
it.
ask you if if you still like do that because I know that was a thing a few years back or whatever, and you.
Yeah, yeah, I've been doing it since 2009
Mm-hmm.
and 20, and really it all took off in 2010.
Yeah.
And so wow, like 9 years. I can't believe I've been lighting quilts up for 9 years. And um it's
Yeah.
still, yeah,
And I
I
saw
still
one
love
of
it.
your videos you did. Maybe I think it's up in your YouTube channel, but
Yes.
how you put this light up and you curl up the two prongs that stick out from the light and you make these little rings that's what you sew like you're sewing on a hook
Yes.
to a piece of
Yeah.
fabric and you
Yeah.
sew it on with that conductive thread
Mhm.
and it's pretty fascinating to watch you do this and I was wondering is that did you was it your idea to see like oh how can I like attach this to the fabric? Oh, I'm going to roll up these little wire prongs.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. It was like, well, here's the light, and it has a positive leg and a negative leg, and they're really sort of malleable. They're not, they're not stiff, and they're meant to be soldered, so they kind of have like that
Ah.
soft, metal
Mm-hmm.
to them. And I thought, well, how am I going to hook? How am I going to turn this into something that can be attached
Mm-hmm.
to fabric? And I did actually look at, a little hook and eye set,
Oh.
and how they have those little curlicues of
Mm-hmm.
metal. And I thought, well, if you just took a pair of pliers and twist these little legs up, they end up looking like those hook and eye
Mm-hmm.
loops. And then you can sew through that with the conductive thread. So with a quilt, if you didn't want to see those legs on the top of your fabric, that means you have to poke a hole in your quilt,
Mm-hmm.
and poke the light up through the back, which is what I typically do. And then most people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're putting a hole in your quilt," but that's because I want the electronics to be on the back. I only want you to see the lights
Right.
from the front.
Yeah.
And that was, yeah. I mean, there's no other way to do
That is
it.
so creative, though. That is just amazing. And I've seen you. You were at one of the shows up here in the area, and you were doing demonstrations on all the lighting in the quilts and stuff like that. And like my mind was blown, and it's crazy. But then, like in another year or so, I watched Project Runway, and they had a whole episode on lights
Yes,
in the
yes,
clothing, and it was
yes.
so cool. So I think it's like now becoming more and more like a normal thing. It's like not so weird anymore.
It's not. And what's funny is it's kind of having like a mini resurgence, which is really fun, because to have been in this space so long, to watch trends come and go, and wearable technology, has come such a long way.
Mm-hmm.
We have these devices that react with us, that we don't even recognize our actual wearable technology, like our Apple Watch and
Mm-hmm.
our Fitbit and all these things that, press up against our skin and go to an app, and, you can clip them onto your clothing. That's all
Mm-hmm.
started back in 2009 with these students, and they were at the forefront, of this wearable technology movement. There are now computer chips that you can buy that are meant to be sewn into a garment, that can record your body temperature, your heart rate, your the ambient noise in the room, and
Mm.
then have the lights react in a certain way uh, towards the sensors that are picking up the data. So I mean, I do it very simply, and it's like, hey, it's pretty. Let's put lights in
Mm-hmm.
quilts.
Mm-hmm.
I do have quilts that react to the environment. I have quilts that, I have programmed with like a programming language.
Oh my gosh.
I've done all this stuff, which,
Wow.
is now like kind of back and cool, and
It is cool
younger
now, yeah.
people, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
they're lighting up their costumes, they're lighting up,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah, anything you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we use it every day. The kids' shoes that light up were kind of like the beginning
Mm.
of, like the little kids' shoes when they
Yes.
run,
Yep.
and the lights flash as they run.
Those are
That
everywhere. I see them
They're
all the time.
everywhere. Yeah, yeah, and that was really the beginning of like the wearable technology thing. And
Uh-huh.
I thought, that's what I want to do.
Wow, that is so amazing. I just, I am not of a scientific mind, so I wouldn't even like have gone there, but I love seeing it and I wouldn't mind trying it. I haven't tried it yet, but I've rewatched your video recently and now I understand it a little more. Like
Yeah,
when I was first like seeing this and stuff, I was just like I was like this is so awesome and amazing, but I don't even know where to start. Now
right.
I kind of have a little bit more and I've seen it used in so many other applications. So yeah, that's pretty cool
Yeah.
and very forward thinking in the quilt industry.
Oh
Um,
gosh. Yeah,
you
if
know,
anything, I'm before my time.
right?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Well, and then, one of the pieces that really worked to what I wanted to do, like I said, I didn't think that the technology stuff was going to be where I was going to lay my head in the quilting industry. What
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do was this fabric manipulation thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I started to do was blend the two together. And I started making these heavy manipulated quilt pieces that I would put the technology in so that it was sort of like my bridge to say, look at this really cool other stuff I can do.
Right,
And
right.
that's where it was sort of like heirloom meets high tech and texture meeting technology, and that was
Mm-hmm.
how I was billing it for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, what has happened in the industry is, people are less interested in doing the technology stuff, and now they're more interested in doing the heirloom sewing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that it came around.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
only took
Well, yeah, and let's talk about heirloom sewing. Um, and what I noticed too is nowadays that there is a return to what is more like simple and
Mhm.
back, like just not people are trying to escape the um, technology that's in their lives every day, and they
Yes.
just want to like slow it down and like unplug. And I
Right.
think that's what this kind of stuff does for people. Like even hand quilting, that has really made a huge comeback.
It has.
And it's
Embroidery's back.
cathartic for people.
Yeah,
Yes, and
yeah,
hand embroidery. Right, right. So
yeah,
let's talk
yeah,
about the heirloom sewing with you.
yeah. Well, and it is truly, to me, it was exactly that. What I would do, so I come at it from a couple of different angles. First, I had, family members in my in-laws that were incredible makers.
Hmm.
They were, my grandmother-in-law, her sisters, they were the master crafters. They could make anything. They could hook a rug, they could cane a chair, they could can a vegetable, and they wanted to teach me, and I wanted to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so connected to these things that felt lost to
Mm-hmm.
me. Growing up in Chicago, as you
Mm-hmm.
know, we're very urban here.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of things that are like historic, and you can go to a museum, you can go to a historic home,
Mm-hmm.
but like our day-to-day lives are not really, I mean, at least mine wasn't. We didn't have hand-me-downs, we didn't have heirlooms, we didn't have antiques. So to be part of this family that had nothing but this stuff was incredible to me. So they wanted to teach me, and I was so willing to learn these things. And I started to notice like vintage textiles and how they were made. And I realized that texture in garments was done by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, for the most part, it was either smocking, pin tucks, gathers, pleats. These were all things that I had learned in fashion
Mm-hmm.
for the theater, but they weren't anything that we were doing in quilting. And being an art quilter primarily, I do consider myself an art quilter. I know I do a lot of modern style quilts, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably more on the arty side than
I agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I would do these art quilts that had all this texture in them. And I thought, well, if I love it, somebody else might want to know how to do it too.
Yeah.
So, and that's really where I thought I would land in the industry, was to be known as this person who really could manipulate and do all this stuff with fabric and then put it into a quilt.
Yeah.
So, here we are. And what I noticed too is that I love that these are techniques that aren't really used anymore, but I'm noticing that like the cosplay industry is really pulling it in. Um, they want to learn how to do this stuff because they need texture and all of that in their garments.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's like my whole line of products and all my patterns and everything have like a secondary life in
Mm.
the cosplay industry, which is
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't hurt that I'm kind of like this, retro rock and roll girl who's teaching you how to do heirloom sewing.
I know. I think that's so funny because, I still have, I got your t-shirt that you're wearing right now. It's,
Yes.
Cheryl has this t-shirt that's been around for a while, and it's black and it's got like a white skull with what you would normally see crossbones, but the crossbones are a needle with a thread going up the other side. So
Yes.
it's really cool, and it's not a scary skull. It's actually
No.
kind of cool. I like the one eye is a little bigger than the other, so it's
Yeah.
it's almost like it's a crazy skull for crazy over sewing. That's how I look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And somebody
Yeah.
was like, "You're like a pirate sewist." And I'm like, "Yes."
Yes.
Totally. Yeah. And I love skulls. And I was doodling while I was on a conference call at work one day, and I drew this design in the side of my notebook. And I came home and I turned it into a digital drawing and wanted to turn it into a t-shirt for myself.
Hmm.
And then I wore it somewhere and somebody was like, "Where did you get that shirt?"
Yep.
And I would buy it if you sold it. And I thought, well, I guess now I'm in the t-shirt business.
There you go. Yeah.
But I think what's funny is I never really thought that my coworkers ever thought of my little cottage business until one day I was at a Comic-Con with my day job,
Hmm.
and someone came running over from my company. They came running over and they were like, "I just saw this lady and she's wearing your shirt and we have to go talk to her." And so they grab me and they bring me to you.
Yes, that was me. I was at the C2E2 in Chicago, and I was wearing her
Yes.
shirt because I'm like, this is going to be cool to wear to C2E2 because, I'm not like a cosplay kind of type person, but, I associated. Isn't that weird that I made that
It was
connection?
so
And then
wild.
there you were.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was crazy. I know, I know.
I think I took a picture of us that day
We
too.
did.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really fun.
It was
That
such
was
a small world, but yeah,
it
it really
is.
makes an impact. That shirt made an impact, and you still have it in your shop, and you even have a
Yep,
pink version, which is so
I
cute.
do.
And
Yeah.
I have to say, though, I don't know where you order your shirts from, but that is like the highest quality cotton. It's really soft, and I've taken good care of it because I want it to last a long time, so I never put it in the dryer. I hang it to
Right.
dry.
Yes.
So yeah, it's like today I still think it looks almost brand new, and it's been years since
Yes.
I've had it.
It has been. Yeah, and that's what I love about and I get them made here locally in Chicago.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
Love it.
So I know it's
Yeah.
one business supporting another there. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
I love this design. I put it on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
and
know. I
now,
was like to
yeah.
my husband, I'm like, man, why didn't I think of this for a design for me? It's so cool.
Yeah, and then I have a new skull design out now too, and we've kind of branched out and have like a little line of sewing skull merchandise. So
Yeah,
again, totally random. Did not expect that that was going to be how this career of mine starts, but sure enough,
that's crazy.
I didn't think that my coworkers really. I guess they were paying closer attention than I gave them a lot of credit for.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah,
That
that is
was
a little
really cool.
surprising. Uh-huh. So yeah, I'll put the links to your shop and everything because you've got a lot of cool stuff in your online shop at muppin.com. So I'll definitely put that link in the show notes. Um, all right, so with heirloom sewing, this sewing is done by hand.
For most of it, it is. There
Okay.
are some techniques that you can do with your machine. The smocking, some of the gathering techniques, even pleats and things like that. I do those things by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and there is this resurgence in like the slowing down of the stitching
Mm-hmm.
and taking that time for yourself. It's almost like a self-care thing, which I
Mm-hmm.
love. And to take a piece of fabric that's flat and turn it into this dimensional thing is very rewarding. And I know that some people think like the handwork is that dirty H word, that
I know. I know.
and so I do have techniques you do by machine, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them use the various feet that come with your machine or that you can get for your machine.
Okay.
So I think that it's a nice way to take what your your basic skill set of sewing a straight line. And just by doing these simple alterations and even putting on a different foot,
Mm-hmm.
a different type of needle. So I use a lot of double needles.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, people are scared of that stuff. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I could never put a double needle on my machine. And no, don't be afraid of that. It's a lot of fun, and
Mm-hmm.
the technique is really cool when it's
Mm-hmm.
finished. And I so that to me is what appeals about it to me. I think that too, when I teach, I make a point of explaining like where these techniques came from, where in history these began, where
Mm-hmm.
you'll see a lot of this in historical garments, where you'll see a lot of this in, um, and why people turn to these styles of manipulating fabric, because for the most part, it was a way to take a very plain piece of fabric and make it look very expensive, and also as a way to show off your skill set, your needles skills. And
Mm-hmm.
you know we don't sew for our trousseau anymore, but back in the day, women did sew for their future life that they would have with their husband.
Mm-hmm.
And what they would do is they would have all the undergarments and the slips and the dresses and the coats, and they would make this stuff, and they would use every fine skill that they could muster to make their trousseau as fine as possible. So I think that in a way a lot of this is a way to honor what they did and brought forward. And then I read these turn of the century sewing books that are really not written for anyone who doesn't know how to sew.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to take these text blocks and translate them into visual pictures, and that's hopefully where my patterns and my tools and things like that. It's a way to make modern what came before, and that's
Yeah.
been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I see that, and I think that that is what is really amazing and fascinating with you bringing that into the modern sewing and quilting world. And you do, like, for instance, in a quilt, I've seen you just do like a block that has the smocking in it, so it's
Hmm.
not like this enormous um, project that's never going to end, that takes years to
Right.
complete. So it's
Yes.
just like a little touch of it, and it makes such a dramatic impact on that quilt. So it's pretty cool. I like the way that you've done that, and I think that. I mean, I don't know what your feedback has been from your classes, but I feel like people can digest it easier and they appreciate it more, and then they feel like they can really do it.
Yeah, I mean, my students love learning this stuff. And what they find at the end is this wasn't as hard as it looks.
Yeah.
The technique is fabulous in the quilt. It's just really stunning. And then everybody will want to know how you did it. And what I say typically is, if you skip a stitch, if you feel like you're not doing it right, put it in your quilt anyway. Everyone will be so impressed with how it looks that if anybody says, hey, I think you skipped a stitch here, you just say, I unfriend you.
Right?
Because there, you don't need
Yeah.
that negativity in your life. You just say, you know
Totally. I
what?
know.
Yeah, you need a new set of friends if
Yeah.
they're, getting that close to
Nitpicking.
your work.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the modern movement is a perfect example of where you could use these techniques to great effect, because one of the big tenets of modern quilting is to have large expanses of negative space. And for me, when that is not, doesn't have anywhere for your eye to rest
Mm-hmm.
or anywhere for your eye to go. And so if you put some textured fabric in that negative space, then the eye has something that's just a little more visually interesting
Mm-hmm.
to look at that spot and say, oh, I really like that. It's also a way for you to direct where you want the eye to go in a quilt. So if you have a particularly a block that needs special attention, so it's maybe like the center of a flower, or the whole bright spot of the quilt is that area, you could use additional texture to really highlight that part and make that part of the quilt really stand out. I like this stuff so much that I'm always coming up with new and interesting ways to use it. To me, every single one of my patterns becomes brand new because I can look at a space in a pattern design and say, oh, instead of a flat piece of fabric there, I'm going to use this textured piece. And now that's a brand new style of quilt. So all the simple quilts like 9 patches and things like that, they really pop with textured blocks instead of flat blocks, and mixed together with the flat blocks.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a type of the sewing, it's called ruching, and you
Yes.
actually created a tool to help do that type of stitch or technique.
Yeah. So I have a tool. It's like you're not really a quilter unless you have like some tools
I
that
know.
you're selling people, right?
Right.
But no, truly, my tools were invented out of necessity, and I have basically one tool that I sell, and well, two. But but there's the one major tool, and it's my Heirloom smocking template.
Okay.
Now, I don't know about you, but so there's this foodie guy, Alton Brown.
Yes.
He's got a show, Good Eats,
Good Eats,
which I love. And he talks about the kitchen unitasker, with a thing that only does one thing, like the avocado knife. It's like I am a sewing tool. I don't like the unitasker. So for me, when I developed my Heirloom smocking template, it was for smocking because I was about to go on TV with it. I was about to film my DVD with it. I was looking for a way to do the steps faster, so I developed this tool. Well, again, because I hate the thing that only does one thing, I had to come up with like 10 other things that my tool does.
Whoa, that's
and
pretty
one
cool.
one of them is to do a vintage style ruching. And to mark your fabric for the ruching technique, you use my Heirloom smocking template. So, yeah.
Right, cool. Yeah.
It's all about being crafty with your own stuff.
That's pretty cool, though, because then you don't have to worry about measuring and making the mark. Because I tried smocking before, and it was just like a hot mess because of you have to draw this grid, and you're, like stitching from this box to that box or this point to that point, and just even like drawing that grid is,
well, and before the grid even existed, they used to do it with a series of dots, and the dots you could buy as like an iron-on. And so back in the 50s and the 60s, you could buy these patterns, and they came with like a sheet of iron-on dots.
I didn't
and
know
so
that.
see, I'm full of useless knowledge. And so you'd flip your fabric over, and you would iron on these dots. And to me, with certain fabrics, in like modern fabrics, they're pretty smooth, they're pretty nice. But if you have that print on the one side, you can't tell, like, is the dot there?
Right.
Is the dot not there? So the grid method is the best. And I was drawing hundreds of grids to prep for these TV appearances. So I thought, there's got to be a better way.
And there is, yay.
I want to get to the sewing. I want to do the fun part. I don't want to do the
That's what I was
part.
thinking. I'm like, when am I going to be able to like sew this?
Smock. Yes, that's it. Let's get to smock it to me. Yeah, exactly. So that was where the tool was born. And I looked around for maybe something that I could even buy from somebody else. I really didn't want to be in the business of, just like the t-shirt business. I sort of fell into it. And next thing you know, I'm working with a laser cutter, and
Wow. But
We're cutting laser templates.
but it's very forward thinking and innovative, so that's why all your stuff has like turned into parts of your business, I think. And then I
Yeah.
want to back up a quick second because just in
Sure.
case people don't know what smocking is or
Yes.
ruching, just
Yes.
a quick little description of what those are.
Sure. So we think of smocking as like the fronts of little girls' dresses
Mm-hmm.
where they are pleated up and then they are taking stitches over those pleats in like a decorative way. And that is English smocking.
Okay.
So that's not the smocking that I'm talking about. The type of smocking I'm talking about is called Canadian smocking.
Mm.
And it's another form of smocking where the fabric is pleated from the back, and where you take your stitches create all different kinds of designs on the front of the fabric. So it could look like you take a flat piece of fabric, and by the time you stitch it all up, it can actually look like it's a basket weave, almost like you took little tubes of fabric and wove them together.
Mm-hmm.
But I promise you, if you peek under there, which I normally tell you not to do, but but if you peek under there, you'll see the stitches and you'll see that it's actually stitched from the back. So that's smocking. It's been around it's been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
They have paintings of women with smock dresses in the 1500s. This is not anything I invented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the ruching is a style of taking a skinny ribbon or a skinny strip of fabric and sewing, gathering stitches in it so that the fabric or the ribbon gathers up in a very decorative way. And this started around 1700. The word ruching is French, and the word ruche means honeycomb.
Oh.
And so it's a way to texturize this strip. And then these long ribbons, I kind of think of them as historical rickrack.
Okay.
Because they were applied at the bottoms of dresses and around the necklines. And it was just a way to take French court dresses and make them very elegant and to raise the surface of the fabric. Because, again, that was very trendy and very
Mm-hmm.
in vogue to do in the French court. And so that actually extends all the way, comes to America, and you will see a lot of ruching in both Civil War era gowns and also the Baltimore album quilts.
Oh.
So it did cross over into quilting in that same 1860s to 1866 range. At the same time, it was very popular in Civil War dresses. So again, not new.
Where do you find this stuff? Like, how did you find that it was used in Baltimore album quilt?
Well, again, because one of those things that I did during that 5 years of small quilts was to really dive into as many techniques as I could.
Oh.
And one of the things that I started to realize is that if you want to learn, you have to sit at the knee of the masters, right? Like just like
Yeah.
I'm learning
Yeah.
from my
Mm-hmm.
in-laws. So I learned Baltimore album quilting from Mimi Dietrich and Ellie Sienkiewicz.
Yeah.
And
And
they were,
the Baltimore
yeah,
out style of quilting is like mostly applique, just so if
it
people don't know.
is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And it's mostly applique and again, more handwork,
Right, right. Okay.
but also very historical. It's almost like the historical reproductions in quilting, right? So in cosplay, doing historical reproductions very part of cosplay. You could be Renaissance fairs, military reenactors. They all do historical replicas of costumes. This is the Baltimore album quilts are like doing historical reproductions of quilts.
Huh.
And so there are
Yeah.
beautiful Baltimore album quilts in museum collections around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and many of them have been turned into patterns and books, and you can find some beautiful examples of those to inspire your quilting.
Yeah, that's
So
really
that's what I did.
cool. Yeah, yeah. It's something that I've always wanted to do too is just go back. I've got that book behind me, America's Glorious Quilts, but just like go back and actually, learn how to do all of these classic quilt blocks and
Yes.
learn about them
Yes.
and where
Yes.
they came from. And yeah,
And why they're named what they're named and
right.
all that stuff. It's so
Yeah.
interesting to
Like
me.
Drunkard's Path.
Yes.
Yeah.
And 5440 or fight, and it's like, well, there's got to be a story behind that name, and it
Yeah.
is. It's a political thing,
Mm.
and so there are definitely styles of quilting over the years. If you go back and you look at some of the first quilts, the first types of applique, the first types of these and that, they all come from garment making, and they all come from a desire to make your quilt pretty,
Mm-hmm.
and a desire to show off your handiwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we're all
Yeah.
crafters at heart, and this was a way
Yeah.
to take what they knew and turn it into something that was useful, and still be pretty enough that they wanted to live with it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I love
I
it.
like it too. I really appreciate it. And just from me being in the interior design industry, these techniques are very high end and pricey
Yes.
to have done
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
I liken it to, in the fashion industry, the couture houses in
Yes.
Europe. That
Yes.
I mean, I watched a special on what this one couture house. Now I can't remember the name of it. It's very famous, and I was amazed. They were showing the workroom. There was not one sewing machine on that
Nope.
level where they were
Nope.
at.
They were all doing
All
it
of
by
these
hand.
seamstresses were doing it by hand.
Hmm.
And that really is the true meaning of couture, right?
Yes.
Haute couture, or whatever, how you say
Yes,
that.
exactly. It
Yeah.
is. Yes.
So,
And I do share a lot of couture videos on my Facebook page because, I find them just as fascinating as everybody else. And so when Dior
that's what it
or,
was.
yeah,
Karl
yeah, Dior,
Lagerfeld.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and they're just so fascinating to
Mhm.
watch them. And it gives me inspiration to want to take those techniques and apply them to my work. And
Mhm.
I'm just so fascinated by it that
Mhm.
I have the ability to learn how to do it and then teach everybody
I'm
else.
glad you're teaching it because it's not widely out there, and I love that you're bringing it back. And it is keeping alive an art that may have really been forgotten and pushed to the past in lieu of all the modern stuff. But
Yeah,
in reality, though, in the design and fashion world, it is considered like valuable and high
very
end
expensive.
because
Yes.
it takes the time and the skill to produce that, to even do it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
labor intensive. And
Mm-hmm.
I liken it again to, if you're going to knit yourself a sweater, right? You have your pattern and you do your best, and in the end you have this beautiful sweater, and you ask somebody, how can you put, like, how much would it cost you to make me a sweater like that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like it's priceless.
Mm-hmm.
It took me so long. I had to learn all these skills. I had to do all this stuff, and then I had to take the time to do it. So when I was recently in a furniture store, I saw a pillow. It had smocking on it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so impressed that I took a picture of it. And then I took a picture of the price tag, and that pillow was $300.
Yeah.
And I thought I could make that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I just want yeah, those kinds of skills are, they're not lost.
Right.
People like me are out there teaching these things,
Yeah.
and I'm learning my new skills every day too.
That's excellent. I love it. So thanks for sharing that with us. Um, so yeah, and then we talked about the technology sewing
Yeah.
and cosplay. Uh,
Yes,
so that's kind of a newer business, right, for you, like the So
it
Much
is.
Cosplay.
Yeah.
But do you? Okay, so I know you teach it because like you do episodes on. Well, let's just talk about the TV stuff first. We'll back
Yeah.
up. So TV on PBS, you have made like gajillion appearances on Quilting Arts,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you come on there and you teach these like really just not mainstream type of techniques, and I
Right.
love it. Like I loved your shibori dyeing
Yes,
fabric
that's
because
one
I
of my
love that kind
favorite
of
ones.
fabric. I love that kind
Yes.
of fabric.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you did something. I don't know if this is what it's called, but you did the thermochromic paint. But
Yes.
tell me what this is, because you had a fabric and you, like, I don't know, dipped it in stuff or whatever, did something painted, and then
Yes.
you put your hand on it and took your hand away, and then it showed your hand impression on it.
Yes. So this goes along with the technology stuff that I was
Mm-hmm.
doing, and thermochromic paint or thermochromic pigment has
Mm-hmm.
been around since like the early 90s. I remember these
Wow.
t-shirts. Yeah, I remember these t-shirts. They were called hypercolor t-shirts,
Uh-huh.
and really everyone in my school had one, and all it did was just show how sweaty all the boys were, because they change color with heat.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And so now this you can buy it as a pigment that you can add to a medium. I typically mix it with a fabric medium, then I paint it onto my fabric, and now my quilt has areas that if I put my hand on it, it will show my hand impression, or it can reveal something from underneath. So it's a great way to do like little I spy types things.
Oh, cool.
um, and so it is a technology, I guess, that's been around for a while,
Sure.
that I decided to put it in my quilt. So
That's fantastic. And I even
yeah.
think that is kind of a cool thing to, like, if people are teaching their kids to quilt or sew, that would be a fun thing for that. They would love to learn something like that.
Right, because it's
Yeah.
like fabric that does something.
Uh-huh.
Glow in the dark is really similar.
Mm-hmm.
Those solar changing fabrics. I'm sure you see these shops, in all the warm touristy areas. They have T-shirts that when you go out into the sunlight changes the pigment on the fabric, and it reveals the color in the sunlight. And so there's photochromic,
Mm-hmm.
there's thermochromic,
Wow.
there's even hydrochromic. There's I mean,
Water.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So there's all these different
That's
pigment
cool.
styles that you can go out there and paint onto your fabric.
Yeah.
And for me, what it was, I would take a really cute print, and I would paint over it so it was almost blacked out.
Yeah.
And then when you put your hand on it, you reveal the parts of the
So cool.
fabric.
I remember
Yeah.
that episode. So cool.
Yes. I've done some pretty wild things on TV.
You have. It's so awesome. So quilting arts, and that is really like, your foundation too, of like you are a quilt artist. And
Hmm.
all of that is, artistry when you're pulling these techniques from here and there and pulling them together in an art quilt and creating texture and, technology, things that do something to the fabrics. It's
Yep.
it's really an art. So
Yeah. Thank
and
you.
yeah, and then It's So Easy
Yes.
is another show, and I've
Yes.
seen you on there, and that's where you did do some of your heirloom sewing on an
I did.
episode.
Yeah, I started off
Mm-hmm.
doing more of the quilting stuff on there,
Yeah.
and then cosplay sort of became a little more to the forefront. And what happened was, now that I'm in the industry, and people always ask me, where are all the young people who sew?
Mm-hmm.
And having spent all those years at the Comic Con, I would look around at all these cosplayers, and they're the demographic that we're all looking for. That 18 to
Yeah.
39 quilter,
Mm-hmm.
that 18 to 39-year-old sewist. And I said, I know where they're at. They're at Comic Con. They're
Mm-hmm.
making costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody's like, what's that? And I thought, okay, well, it's time to put my money where my mouth is and show you the progression that I took
Mm-hmm.
into quilting and sewing. And that's from my costume making over into our other hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
If we focus on these young cosplayers, then we're bringing them into the industry and then exposing them to all the other cool things that our industry has to offer:
Mm-hmm.
machine embroidery, quilting,
Mm-hmm.
home decor, more garment making.
Mm-hmm.
They will be exposed to it because we've opened the doors and welcomed them. And
Right.
that's really important to me. And I wanted to have a way to incorporate the independent sewing dealer, the places where we go to get our machines and have them serviced and buy our fabrics. I wanted them to have a way to appeal to this customer. And so I'm working with R&K Distributing, and they make my line of cosplay products that
Cool.
we have available to the sewing industry.
Oh,
So,
very
yeah.
nice. Yeah, that's really great. And I you know, it's actually the cosplay and the sewing part of it has really become huge within those like C2E2 shows and Comic Con shows. And before,
Yes.
like you never would see a booth with Simplicity patterns in it before.
Right.
Now
Yes.
that they're there, like the
Yes.
Simplicity company is there.
Yes.
They've got
Yes.
these beautiful costumes on their, the mannequins, and wow, I was just drawn into that. It was so cool,
Yeah.
and it's great. Yeah, and then you're
Yes.
you're continuing that, so it's like a whole
Hmm.
nother market. And these the it's amazing what these young cosplayers can make. I've watched a couple of shows. I don't know, this one show was like a few years back, but that was like my first even like um I guess introduction to cosplay as like
Oh,
this is
was
what
it Cosplay Melee?
it
It
was. It
might,
had it
yeah.
had Yaya Han in it,
Yes. Yeah.
and it
That was
followed
Cosplay
her.
Melee. Oh
Yes.
no, that was it. There's a different one. Yeah, but there
Okay.
is one that there were two at the time. One sort of followed her,
Yeah.
and then the other one was more of a competition style
Yes, I've
thing.
I've seen both of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the first one I saw was following her and a couple of other people that were regulars to competitions of
Hmm.
cosplay,
Hmm.
and it was really interesting to watch. I mean, the way that they put together these costumes and just they are very innovative because they're just like they don't know if it's going to work, and they're just playing with these
Exactly.
fabrics and
Yes.
textiles.
Yes.
And yeah, it's crazy, but it's really cool. So that's a
They
really
have no fear and
no,
no
yeah.
and a lot of them are so self-taught, and
Hmm.
so we have so much ability to give them like the right tools and the right training and the
Hmm.
and teach them the things that we're not teaching in school anymore. I mean, there's
Yeah,
no home ec anymore, so
I
you
know.
know.
Yeah, I know. And a couple of them, I would see them like with this little, sewing machine that is not meant to be made to sew through this heavy stuff that they were trying to shove through the sewing machine.
Yes. And that's where we as a sewing industry can come in and
Yeah.
like give them the tools and
Hmm.
the right education, and that's part of my mission too. And so
Hmm.
I teach sewing and cosplay techniques across the country now.
That's so
So,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So
Yeah,
you
it's
really have
wild.
a passion for our industry, and I love it. And it's really great for our, communities, and just continuing to drive the industry forward. So I
Thank
love
you.
it. I
Thank you.
just before we go though, I want to ask you, is there anything that you keep to yourself as a hobby? Because now this is your work,
Right.
and you're making stuff for, TV shows, you're making step outs for all that, and, teaching stuff. So what is just yours?
I still love to learn. And right now I'm taking a class on um 18th, is it 18th century? I think it's 18th century, what's called passementerie.
Oh,
And
trim making.
and what we're learning is how to make fly fringe. So it's usually it's like bullion fringe and all these other types of garment trims
Yeah.
that were made in the 1800s that are now typically made by machine.
Yeah.
But I wanted to learn like how did they do that, and there's a woman teaching it, and I'm taking that class. I also just went to a 2-day intensive corset making class.
Oh.
So I still do those things for myself where I'm learning new things. I may not ever teach this passementerie but I feel like I want to know it.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's the stuff I keep for myself.
Oh, cool. I like that. Yeah.
And I still make costumes for myself, all the costumes while I do make them for work, but
Uh-huh.
I do make sure they all fit me because I do wear them and I do go to Comic-Con in them.
Cool.
So, that's
Yeah.
still for me too.
Oh, great, great. Really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for coming on the show and introducing all of us to, some of these newer technology techniques and bringing back the tried and true and hand sewing techniques of the heirloom sewing.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
It's been my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I definitely have to have you back because there's so many facets of what you do that we could just focus on like one of those
I
on a
know,
whole show.
right?
But
Awesome.
I really appreciate you coming. Let's just talk about if you have any upcoming events or products that you want to
Oh my
put out
gosh.
there.
So then I'm teaching, let's see, the original Sewing and Quilt Expo in Novi, Michigan. That would be
Okay.
November 14th through the 16th. And then Road to California in January.
Cool.
Yeah,
I always
I'm
want to go to
teaching there.
that.
Oh, it's a great show. It's a big quilt show.
That's what I
They have
hear.
wonderful classes and just a giant quilt display exhibit. Lots of vendors. You'll really love Road to California.
Cool. Okay. That's in
Gosh,
February?
that's in
Oh,
January.
January. Okay.
Yep, yep. And then let's see. I'll probably be doing some Comic Cons, so you'll see me at a bunch of Comic Cons in 2020,
Cool.
and including Dragon Con, which we are definitely going back to in September of 2020. So that would be 90,000 attendees, and most of them there for cosplay. So I'm very excited to go back to that.
Nice. Isn't it cool to go to an event or like a gathering of like that where everybody is like just as excited about that stuff as you are?
Yes, I feel like it's like
Yeah.
we're at our Disneyland, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's your happy place. I never
Hmm.
see angry or frowny people at any of those types of events because they're there and they're learning and they're seeing their cool stuff and they're seeing new products, and how could you not be happy?
Right, right. Yeah, and
you know.
that's what I felt when I went to my first C2E2, which is it's a Comic-Con in Chicago. And I was very new to it, and my husband was more into it than I was, so that's why I
Sure.
went.
Yeah.
But I was like amazed, and I didn't mind going to that with him, again and again, because you're right. Like the people were so happy and energetic and flying from booth to booth, and they had their
Mhm.
costumes on, and then these adults had their little kids, and they were both dressed up. It was so cool.
Yes.
It was so
Yeah, it's like a
fun.
family affair
Yeah,
now,
family
you know.
affair, and it was fun. I really felt the fun vibe of it, so that's why
Yeah.
I kind of liked going to that. But yeah, that's cool. All right, so you're doing the Dragon Con in next September,
Mhm.
and are you going to be the new season of It's So Easy is coming in December, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So I'll be in the new season of It's So Easy in December, and I'm also going to be on the next season of Quilting Arts.
Oh,
So
cool. All right.
I know.
Wow, you do have a lot going on. That's wonderful, though. So
Thank you.
great. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, and I
No
really, really
worries.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Wasn't that so great? This was such a fun episode for me to record, and I love learning about things that I just don't know much about, and especially in the sewing world. And Cheryl has got some really interesting and cool techniques that you can incorporate in all types of sewing, quilting, um, clothing, cosplay. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. I will chat with you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Make and Decorate podcast with Stephanie Socha Design, and you can find me on my website. The podcast is there in the show notes at stephaniesochadesign.com, on Instagram, and on YouTube.